It was my turn to take the kids trick-or-treating. The previous year it was my wife's, and we trade back and forth every year. My son and daughter are aged 7 and 9. Usually I stay on the street while my kids go up to different houses to collect candy. After about an hour and a half of walking around, we came to one of the more popular hotspots for collecting candy, a main street in the neighborhood. Lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns. So I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl, about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird homemade mask, like cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked me if she could trick-or-treat with us, so I said sure, and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend from school. As we continued, I started to notice a large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the girl, so I tried to start up some small chat with him. I said something like, "Nice weather, huh?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me, while our kids went up to the stairs to the next house. I tried again. "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded, but didn't say anything. I figured he just wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I stopped trying. We carried on for about another 15 minutes, until suddenly my kids came up to me and said they wanted to go home. This surprised me as we hadn't been out for too long, and their bags were only about a third full. In any case, I agreed, waved goodbye at the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started our way home. The weird thing is that when I glanced back, the man and his daughter were just standing there staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not moved at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently the girl with the cardboard mask approached them and said she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join us to trick-or-treat, and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turned out, she wasn't really a girl at all, but an older woman around my age with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing, the old woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag, apparently when I wasn't looking. This is why they asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out and they wanted to just get away from her. I brought my kids home and told my wife what happened. We made sure to check through all their candy, but didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything since nothing really happened, but thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now. What the heck was that old woman doing? And who the hell was that man following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. I just think it's sick that there are people out there on Halloween hiding behind masks and pretending to be children. This happened when I was 12 and my brother was 17, and it's truly proof that the living are more terrifying than the dead. I think about this every single Halloween. This is not a paranormal story. The community I grew up in was made of mostly Hispanic people, so the folklore of La Llorona was very popular in the area, especially around Halloween. For those of you who don't know the myth of La Llorona, it's basically a story about a woman who married a rich man, had a perfect life, and then the man cheated on her. She was so distraught that she took her children to the river and drowned them. When she realized what she had done, she threw herself in the river and drowned herself. But she couldn't pass on to the afterlife without her children, so she roams the river looking for her kids. If she spots living children, she will grab them and drown them to take them with her to the afterlife. The story is meant to keep kids from playing in the river. Most of my friends were too cool or grown up to go trick-or-treating that year, and we were planning on having a party instead. I was really disappointed and asked my brother if he would take me trick-or-treating. He agreed, and we went while it was still light outside so I would still be able to make it to the party before the end of the night. Since we had gone too early, there weren't a lot of people ready to hand out candy, so after a disappointing trek, we started walking back home. On our way home, we passed a park that had a running river next to it. On Halloween, older teens would usually wait at this park and try to see if they could spot La Llorona. Waiting to spot her at this particular park was a well-known town tradition that people had done for decades, and it still continues to this day. However, there were no kids or teens there yet because it was still kind of early. There were people in the park putting on a La Llorona play. We decided to stop and watch. There was really not much of an audience. It seemed like it was just us and another few kids who were a part of the group putting on the play and were not in costumes. None of them had trick-or-treat buckets with them either. When we sat down, a woman approached us and asked us if we were trick-or-treating. I told her we were, and she dropped a small comic book in my trick-or-treat bag and smiled. She seemed kind of welcoming. The play started and I got a weird feeling that something was off. The woman playing La Llorona pointed my brother and myself out in the audience and asked us what religion we were, to which he responded, Roman Catholic. She then told us that La Llorona was also Roman Catholic and she was burning in hell for her sins and rejecting Jesus. She then told us that Halloween was an evil holiday and everyone who celebrated would burn forever. The play progressed to get weirder and weirder, including a scene where La Llorona started talking about abortion and held up a fake fetus and pretended to eat it. My brother and I got up to leave, but the people stopped us and started yelling at us to sit down, but we kept going. They started following us down the street, and my brother grabbed my hand and started running because he was afraid they were going to harm us. When we finally got to our street, only about 3 people were still following us, yelling at us about how we were going to hell and we needed to accept Jesus. My brother and I went inside quickly, and he locked the front doors and then frantically ran around the house making sure all the doors and windows were locked before he called our dad at his office. Our dad told us to call the police and he'd be home in 15 minutes. When my dad got home, the people were still outside, chanting and singing some prayer songs, asking God to save my brother and my soul. My dad shooed them away and told them the police would be there any second. They were not deterred and stayed there chanting until the police showed up and threatened to arrest them. I was so freaked out by the events that I decided I didn't want to go to the party, and instead just wanted to organize my Halloween candy and put aside all the Snickers for my brother as a thank you for taking me trick-or-treating. Snickers were his favorite. My mom ordered pizza and we sat down to watch Halloween Town while we went through my trick-or-treat bag. I was halfway through sorting my candy when I came across the comic book the lady had dropped in there. I opened it up and it truly horrified me. It was a propaganda comic about a little boy who went to a haunted house, ended up being hit by a car on the way home, and went to hell because he hadn't found Jesus. I was really scared, and for weeks as a child, I had nightmares about the event and the comic book. Years later, I asked my mom if she remembered it, and she told me she couldn't forget that, and that her and my father had called the police over it several times. Apparently for years the group would leave envelopes with mine and my brother's name written on it, with different weird creepy comic books and handwritten notes about how they were praying for us. Also invitations to join them in their church, and weird promises about baking us cakes and other creepy ways to entice our children into their church. To this day, we can't figure out how they knew our names or who wrote the letters. It really creeps me out that they did this. This took place a while ago. I was 13 and my family had just moved to a new town. A new friend of mine from school and I had made plans to go trick-or-treating together. At the time, I remember thinking I was a bit too old to still be trick-or-treating, but who doesn't want free candy? My friend and I figured we still had 1 year left of trick-or-treating. Because we were 13 and lived in a fairly safe neighborhood, my parents thought it was fine for us to go trick-or-treating together without adult supervision. Everything was going great. We were having fun, getting some solid candy. and then we rang on one guy's doorbell. The porch light was on and there was a pumpkin or two, so we figured the people in the house were likely to be handing out candy. A middle-aged man opened the door. At first, I was glad because he was dressed in costume and happy to see my friend and me, so I felt we were in for some top-tier candy. I don't even remember what candy he handed out, but I do remember what happened next. He asked us to enter his home, which was weird, but we were 13, so we really didn't think anything of it. He then asked if he could take our photo. He said he always likes taking photos of the kids every Halloween because he loved seeing the costumes. On one of his walls were a bunch of pictures of different random, unrelated children in Halloween costumes. At this point, even being a dumb 13-year-old, I was starting to get kind of creeped out. But I figured it was best not to upset the man and let them take the pictures, then we could leave. So he snaps the photo of us, and then he pulls out a clipboard with a sheet of paper on it with a bunch of names written in childish handwriting. He says he likes the kids whose pics he snaps to sign their names so he knows who they are. At this point, we were both mega creeped out. We should have just run away, but we were conditioned not to be rude, so I decided to sign a fake name. He looked at the paper, looked back up at me, and then down at the paper. He then repeated the fake name I'd given and nodded. Luckily after that he didn't do anything and we were free to leave, but it definitely creeped us both out. At the time I thought he was just an eccentric guy, but as an adult looking back on the story, it seems much more sinister. I'm so glad nothing bad happened to us, and I hope nothing bad happened to any other kids. Halloween with all these costumed kids trick-or-treating in the dark and minimal parental supervision could be a great opportunity for predators to get kids alone in their homes, with no one knowing their kids' whereabouts. Please stay safe out there, and happy Halloween.